So here we are with the C-sharp minor fugue, and as I just said, the subject is different, and how everything is really executed is also different. And I think one thing that people forget with fugues is that they can be just as expressive as any other form of writing. It's all the amount of effort that you can put into the writing that makes it expressive. So with that being said, we're going to hear the subject, there's the subject, we end on E, and I think this is going to be a very good opportunity for me to talk about devising a good counter subject. And in most cases with fugal writing, you have to, well, you could have a very consistent counter subject. In both of these fugues, I bend that little expectation. And I think that's because three-voice writing can be, it can be very difficult. I really won't lie about that. So in this case, we have our answer in G-sharp minor, and one thing that I do is when I come up with a counter subject, I try to see how well it fits from a dexterity point of view in different keys. And if it doesn't, that's perfectly fine, because remember, this is the opening exposition of the fugue. And in this case, just like the F minor fugue, we begin in the soprano, in the alto. We answer in the tenor. And logically, the answer would be in the bass. So I'm going to do my best to play and talk at the same time. It might not really be all that great, but answer in G sharp. Now we're going to go into a sequence which will lead us back to the tonic key. Sorry. C-sharp minor. There's the end of our initial exposition. And as far as I know, there are no strict rules on how to end the cadence to announce that this is the beginning of, this is the end of the exposition. So we clearly hear it. And we cadence perfectly to C-sharp minor. Now, with sequences, most of the time they're going to be in stepwise motion. So going, oh, I didn't number the measures. Going back to the G sharp minor sequence. Hear that? So. It breaks there, but then. So that's the end of our exposition. Now, at the end of the exposition, we do have another sequence. And this is going to lead us to the relative major, which is E major. So let's hear it from the end of the, what is it? The end of the answer in C sharp minor. We cadence perfectly to E major. So the other thing, especially in Baroque writing, is you're going to always have these, I guess, parallels, or I guess you'd call them calling and answering when it comes to, in particularly, two-voice writing. So you can see what I mean in the bottom two staves of the second page, how we change between one voice having sixteenths and the other one being an eighth, and then sixteenths, and then eighths up above. So let me see. It's well, of course, it's a pattern because it's a sequence, but each voice interchanges value. So, and then the lower voice. Sorry. It's something, it's an element that I just find very appealing. I think that's really all there is to it. So at the beginning of page 3, we have our statement in E major, and it's in the bass. Sorry. And notice how the counterpoint behind this subject is not what we heard earlier. And frankly, I don't remember why I did it that way. There's our cadence to E major. And after this, we're going to have a sequence where we wind up in a different key. In this case, F sharp minor. You could somehow get to F sharp major. What would that be? And then, of course, you'd have an F sharp 7, which would lead to B major, which could fall to a B7, which could fall to an E. And from there, you could do an E7. Could you? You could. But then you could have F sharp minor. I don't know. The other thing with fugal writing is that even though the form itself is strict, even though that there are certain guidelines that you have to adhere to for something to be a fugue as opposed to a canon or an invention or a prelude or whatever, is that it's important to modulate to different keys and do so in a way that's very concise. But even though you have all those guidelines, there's still so much freedom that you can have with this kind of form that you don't really find in anything else. So let's just hear from the sequence from E major to F sharp minor. And the ending in F sharp minor. Now, after this, we're going to have another sequence, and you're going to hear that once again, whereas before the E major entrance, we had that parallel of two voices with opposite note values, so 8ths and 16ths. But in this case, there's now a third voice, and it descends into the bass. So let's just hear from F sharp minor. Sorry. We cadence to now A major. I think C sharp major is one of my favorite keys, at least on the piano, because we have all these dark and melancholy chromatic moments here, which especially this clash between, can that be louder, C sharp. It's very, very, very dissonant. There's our D major. An E7 chord. To A major. Now, except we have to be worried about voice leading now. So you can't have too much parallel motion. In this case, if they both, the E and the B and the bass, you could go down to A for both voices, but that just sounds, it sounds clunky and boring. So, oh no wait, that's exactly what I did. Alright. I get an F for the day. So, now, except, of course, if you look at the score, that is what both voices do. All three voices do descend downwards. Sorry. They all descend downwards, which does sound boring. However, you can get around that guideline by, of course, delaying the subject again. So, but then, of course, what I could do is have both the bass and the tenor collide on the same note in unison, but it sounds so empty. especially seeing as now everything is moving into the treble clef. So, again, another tritone, and then the bass and the tenor both descend to A, and the soprano, it is the soprano. Now we have the subject again. And it's a very unique and light moment, isn't it? Because in the E major entrance, the only other entrance where this subject is not in any kind of minor key, we have C sharp minor, G sharp minor, C sharp minor, F sharp minor, and also C sharp minor. That's five different tonic keys for the subject. But then there are only 2 moments where it's in any kind of major key. So it fits with the mood of the fugue. And that's probably something else that I should talk about, is with fugues, because you can express anything that you can express in any other different kind of piece of music, why should it not be allowed that with fugal writing it's strictly absolute, it's subject and nothing else? I find that's a very boring way of thinking. But with fugues, you can also express anything else, and I think the good thing about fugal writing is that if the subject is the same throughout, then that must mean that the mood can be, I guess, changed throughout, but it can still be consistent. C sharp minor is a very dark key, and everything around it can be likewise just as dark. Even moving to, what would it be, F sharp? Everything about C sharp minor is just very, very, very dark and gloomy. But then we have these instances of, E major, we have an E7, so we're falling to A. So when you're deciding what to write with fugal writing, what kind of mood would you want to get across to the listener? I mean, this fugue is definitely very, I guess you'd say, solemn, but then there are moments where the solemn is lifted. It's like the clouds are lifted after a rainstorm and the sun comes out, but then you look at the forecast and it's still going to keep raining. So that's definitely what still happens in this fugue. So let's go from A major until we modulate back to C sharp minor. Another sequence. Interesting. We have a sequence for 2 bars, 3 bars, and then this entire bar before the entrance in the bass is all just quickly wrapping things up to get back to C sharp minor. So you would expect C sharp minor, there we go, but instead you can deceive everybody by introducing the 4th, in this case F sharp minor, and hear how I do that. You would expect the bass to fall to C, but instead, introducing the A in the bass, we're thinking, oh, is that a 6 maybe? An A major chord, but no, because the bass moves, the the tail end of beat 1 is the subject. But all the while, this first half of beat 1 is a 4 chord. That was not really well. Let's just hear the measure before. That's the end of the fugue. And we're back with 3-voice writing, but of course, in my own fashion, the counterpoint just isn't consistent. And especially the final bar is where more harmonies are delayed. Let's just hear it from beat 1, 2, 3. Beat 3 onwards. Kind of a 4 chord. Beat the first half of beat 1, C sharp minor with a 5 in the bass, descending to a 5/7, and that kind of syncopation is a way of getting around writing strictly, say, let's see, 3 and 4. Instead, it's I don't know how to describe it. And in terms of performing, you have to. It's very, not necessarily vague, but keeps the audience on their, the listener on their toes, because you don't know if I'm going to move up to E sharp or E natural. And if we look at both the outer and the two outer voices, the top voice and the lower voice, we're descending. One goes up, the other goes down. But if both the inner voice and the upper voice ascend at the same time, it's just a little bit boring in a way. It's almost like delaying the ending of a sad story.